So hello, and thank you everyone for joining us again for this evening's artist talk, or I'm sorry, this evening's creative response for the Velocity of a Page exhibition. My name is Janelle Hazard, and I am the new Executive Director and Curator at Greater Reston Arts Center. The Velocity of a Page exhibition was originally scheduled to be on view in our physical gallery space located in Reston about 3 weeks ago. And so we're pleased to still be able to offer this collection of work and move it into a virtual multi-platform exhibition. Guest curator Christopher Carden-Bekas, who's here with us tonight, hand-selected all the works to appear on both our website and in our social media platforms. So if you haven't checked it out, please be sure to visit our website and our Instagram as we release new, fresh content. This is the final week of the exhibition, so you have a few days to catch it. If you happen to miss it, it will be available on our past exhibitions link on the website. And of course, you can still visit our Instagram page to catch up on those posts as well. So this is the final program for the Velocity of a Page exhibition. It has been an exciting few weeks as we rolled out new artworks across both platforms. The amount of engagement from artists, educators, community, it has been incredible. We've had great virtual turnouts for our first virtual endeavor, and from local audiences to those joining us from Canada. Someone's here from Canada this evening, and London. So thank you to everyone for participating in our programs. We've received some really impressive reviews from press, starting with local organizations right here in Reston, all the way to Hyperallergic, which is a contemporary arts publication. So it's extremely exciting, and it's such a great and rewarding feeling, especially knowing that this is our first virtual project and everyone is truly just figuring it all out. I think that amount of success really speaks to the talent of Christopher, the participating artists, and our team at Grace. As always, I want to thank our sponsors. So our local longtime partner, Reston Community Center. Hi to Sherry, that's on the call tonight. And of course, I want to thank our board members. Robert Gowdy, our board chair, is here with us this evening. I saw Dan Grove, Leslie, I think Stephanie's here with us again. So thank you all for your support and your leadership. And I see Janet here too. So thank you. We are excited to end this exhibition with a bang, and who else better to help us do that than with performance artist Rex. Without further ado, I am going to turn the program over to Sarah Behrens, who is our Education and Public Programs Manager, to introduce tonight's event. Thank you very much.
All right, so welcome and thank you to everyone joining us for this evening's creative response. Before I introduce the program and our guest responder, I want to go over a few general housekeeping notes for this evening's talk. I've mentioned these points in previous virtual programs over the past couple of weeks if you've joined us, and these were all points that were included in the email sent out to you with tonight's Zoom link information, so bear with me. Upon entering this Zoom meeting, you should have been automatically muted, and we kindly request that you keep your microphone off during the presentation to help us facilitate a clear presentation. And although your audio will be turned off, we would still love to see you. So if you have a camera and are comfortable with this option, please do keep your video on. During the presentation, we encourage you to type any questions you might have for the speaker into the chat feature. And at the end of the talk, we will open it up for a Q&A by reading those questions submitted. You will also be able to use the raise hand feature, and we can call on you to unmute yourself and ask your questions directly. We'll also drop a couple of links that Rex has provided for us with additional information, so look out for those. And finally, this event will be recorded. We're currently recording. So if you would not like to be included in the recording but wish to listen to the talk, simply keep your microphone and camera turned off for the duration of the event. So the Creative Response Program is designed to bring individuals from diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise to Reston to respond to the work on view at Grace. In this case, we are bringing the talk to you all virtually. For past exhibitions, we have had poets, sound artists, chefs, scientific illustrators, professors, podcast producers, and more. And tonight we have the opportunity to see a response from an interdisciplinary artist who will give a performance. As Janelle mentioned, this is the last event for this particular exhibition, but we will have some upcoming programming in June for our Moira Dreier exhibition extension, which I believe Janelle will talk about at the end. So I'm going to introduce our responder for this evening, Rex Delefkeran. So originally from California, Delefkeran is currently based in Washington, D.C., where she has a studio at Stable. She has exhibited work and staged performances at IANA at Hillier in Washington, D.C., Transformer Gallery in Washington, D.C., Panoply Performance Lab in Brooklyn, New York, Southern Exposure Gallery in San Francisco, California, and the Textile Museum at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., among other venues. Delefkeran curates independent projects, most recently Hyphen American at the George Washington University, in collaboration with Saide Makanen. Delefkeran holds a degree in ceramics and performance art from the San Francisco Art Institute and is currently exhibition director at the nonprofit gallery and fellowship program Hamiltonian Artists in Washington, D.C. So welcome, and thank you very much, Rex.
Thank you. Is it all me now? All right. Thank you all so much for showing up on this online performance experience. I'm going to relocate into another space and shield my camera to preserve the allure of a real live performance. But I just wanted to say, to start us off, that I feel really excited and grateful to have the opportunity to respond to such a fantastic show and to be thinking alongside book artists and writers and printmakers, because that's a community of people I don't often have the opportunity to work with and respond to. And a lot of my work has ended up fitting really wonderfully and interestingly in the same conversation. So I'm excited to share my version of a book with you. So bear with me and let's take a little journey into my space.
نشستیم خیلی شبها قصه گفتیم از قدیما یه عمر وعده ها افتاده از امشب به فردا تموم وعده ها رو دادیم و حرفا رو گفتیم دیگه هیچی نمیمونه برای گفتن ما من و تو من و تو من و تو هم صدای بی صداییم با هم از هم جداییم خسته از این قصه هاییم هم صدای بی صداییم
An old man. Anyway, he was, if I'm not mistaken, Minister of War back in 1896 or 7 at the time of Muzaffar bin Shah. Prime Minister, I think around 1915. And generally speaking, he was a man
بله
of
ارزیابی
substantial
یعنی از نظر اینکه خب چندی
for a long
پیشنهادهایی
time,
می‌دادیم به حضرت
from the time that he served
و
as Prime Minister of the Crown Prince in Azerbaijan, in the Qajar tradition. The Crown Prince was sent to hold his own court in Azerbaijan. And, he took my father with him, and my father at that time served as Prime Minister. But of course, when Muzaffar bin Shah returned to Tehran after the assassination of Nasser bin Shah,
تأثیری که واقعا من
my father was
شخصاً
very young still, and he was appointed as Minister of War.
خب دوستان بگم برای
It wasn't until 1915 that he became Prime Minister. And at that, for a very short period of time,
یکی همین
owing to certain difficulties, I understand, vis-a-vis the Russian occupying forces during the First World War in Iran. When I was born, as I was already 3 years, had ascended to the throne, and was already the king. And we lived right next door to the king. And your family. There are stories that this is where Koch and Sepah, let's say Pahlavi, Sepah, the coordinates are Pahlavi on one side, Sepah on the other side, and you go right to Baba Shah. This whole property was my father's, and I'm told that, as a matter of fact, the land on which the Marble Palace was built and the Queen's Palace was built was a grant or a gift, which better to speak, from my father to Reza Shah at the time of his ascendance on the throne, or shortly after. We had a large compound, which is my memory, which really included the Koch Avenue. Koch Avenue was within our compound. Only subsequently it was separated and divided up. And my oldest brother tells me that he planted all those trees on Koch Avenue. And Institute, Assist Pastor,
دریاچه قسمت اردن فولاد
was endowed by my father, which was to the north of Koch, if you remember the North Faro State.
تمام
He built the building, the first building was built by my father. Well, all of us lived in that garden. My father at the time had 7 wives, in my memory.
سعی نکنید
And we all lived in this, around this oval garden, if you will, and his own was separate from all of us on the top of the garden.
که این کاملا ایران می‌خواد
Dominant over the whole area. And we went to school, first to a school which is called Tarbiyat, which was again right next to us. After Reza Shah closed down that school, I remember I only went there for 6 months in my pre-first grade. And from there we went to Sharaf, which was on Amidiye. And there myself and several of my brothers went to Sharaf. And if I'm not mistaken, the girls were going to Anshir Avantar or one of those. That's right. Subsequently, Reza Shah took our house. And we had to go and live in our summer residence in Shemiran. So the whole family moved up to Shemiran, Tajrish, where my father had stayed. Just below the bus station to Rezaiye, you know, there's a big garden which is called Rezvaniye. And around it we were again located in separate houses with our mothers. My father lived in one of the main houses in this compound, which was at the time also shared by one of the elder or senior wives. At that time we went to school in Shahpur, Baba Firdaus school. These were all high schools, grade schools. Later on, I went to, for a short period of time after my father died, we moved to Tehran and I went to Iran Shah for I guess a year, and then after that to Alborz College. From Alborz, this was during the war, from Alborz College, I think I'd finished second year, that's right, I never, second year of high school at Alborz, on the basis of the will of my father, the guardians were at the time Muhtashim Sultan Isfandiyari and Sadrul Ashraf, Jawad Mohsen Saad, were our guardians. Also Mr. Fazin was another one, including my oldest brother. This was sort of a committee of guardians, if you wish. They all willed that we should be sent, according to the testimony of my father, to Beirut to be educated, since Europe was at that time closed. This was 1943. So some of us, the younger ones, who didn't have an outlet to Europe, we went to Beirut, to the prep school of the American University of Beirut, or now, which was at the time called the International College, prep or International College. Anyway, we were boarders there, and I think I stayed full 3 years, maybe a little more, just over 3 years. And in 1946, I graduated from high school of the preparatory school of the American University of Beirut. At that time, I returned to Iran and I spent only about 2.5 months, 3 months in Tehran. And this is the first time I ever visited our villages around Hamadan, between Asadabad, path of Asadabad and Kermanshah, as a matter of fact. That whole area belonged to my father. Large number of villages. It's the first time I have any impressions of the Persian village and the rural life in Persia. And at that time, you must remember, we pretty well owned the business. We were the master of the area, like many landlords. And we received rents from the peasants, which was decided on the traditional basis of whatever provisions the landlord would give to them. You might remember the distribution of the product of the tenant, the peasant. One went for ownership, one went for work, one share went for
Hi, everyone. That's a lot.
Hi. Wow, thank you so much, Rex. I'm not going to say too much, but I feel like that performance is really heartfelt. Um, can everyone hear me okay?
Huh, I was muted.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rex. That was really incredible. I was getting ready to say, I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to leave time for the audience and for Christopher to respond. But from what I saw, it was a very heartfelt performance. I got a sense of a lot of confliction, some pulling and pushing and tucking and untucking and rolling and unrolling. So with that being said, I would love to hear guest curator Christopher's response to this program. I know you all have been in conversation about the planning process and what you had in mind. So Christopher, feel free to take it from here.
Sure, yeah. And first, I'd just like to say thank you, Rex. That was really wonderful. And we will be opening this up to questions. So if you do have a question in the audience, just please feel free to type it into the chat and we'll be reading it to Rex later. But one of my first question and observation is, I was actually thinking about a conversation that we had maybe a couple years ago at this point, and we were talking about the book object and its ability to compress a sense of place and space. And through the opening of the book, being able to then conjure a different environment that can temporarily exist where you are at as a viewer interacting with that book. And watching your performance, I was thinking more about how performance and dance can perform almost a similar archival function through the compression of time and history through the movements of the body through space. So a compression of time versus a compression of space. And I want to know about your thoughts or relationship between performance and history and like embodying that history through your movements.
Yeah, wow, what an awesome question. Yeah, I think a lot about the language of history when it comes to performing with a body, because our bodies are never devoid of the presence of history, and whether it's our personal one or a larger one outside ourselves. So I think when I approach any work, especially work that is in relationship to a text or to legibility, I think a lot about the history of dance that's present when I move my body, because that's my training, and like the residue and like the history of a trained body, and also the relationship between that training and all the bodies that have come before. When it comes to interpreting anything, I think history is present as a concept and as a concept and as a tool. I think history is an incredible tool when it comes to performing, and I feel strongly about its relationship to dance and performance art and all the other types of creative means and practices. Definitely.
And I was also hoping that you might be willing to talk about some of the elements that you used in the performance. Obviously, like the cinder blocks and the wood and the saw give reference to architecture, but also to craft. And you yourself are a maker and a performance. You have a ceramics practice and also a drawing practice. Mm-hmm. And where do you see these things intersecting with your performance?
Yeah, it took me a while to get to a place where I felt comfortable melding sculptural elements and performative elements, and then within that, both like interdisciplinary sculpture elements and dance and performance art elements. It's one of the many things I love about making art is that there's constant problems to engage with and attempt and maybe fail at a little bit. And that's definitely like the language of failure, I think, is embedded for me in the stacking of all those things. I mean, in the performance, cinder blocks in my work at this moment are occurring as a pretty consistent language. The simultaneous presence of history and industry, as well as a very contemporary and often like overlooked building tool to be very simple. So I find it very heavy and also very light at the same time, like ideologically. And the ability to build and stack and like to conjure weight immediately is really satisfying to me, and I think really effective. And by performing with them instead of just having them function in sculpture, I find that I feel a relationship physically to them, and my weight and their weight become conflated. As well, you asked about the sculptural elements. Yeah, I mean, the sawing for me, again, is also a recurring theme in some of my performance practices. In this particular work, I liked relating, it was the first time I thought of the sawing in two and like the separating and like resisting between two things as like a space making for the content of like the book. And like kind of like initiating a performance by like physically prying apart two things was really fun, and I found myself really inspired by looking through a handful of the books in the show, in thinking about the humor in a book and like how do I interpret the humor of like a beginning and an end and all the stuff in the middle. So that's kind of where that idea of the sawing and separating kind of came into play originally. I think because this is kind of a fresh piece in nature, because it's a response to this show, might have a few more thoughts on that now that I'm catching my breath. But yeah.
And along those lines, thank you for participating in this talk immediately after performing.
Yeah.
Physical feat that you just went through. So I'm glad you're able to like sit on a comfortable couch while you're talking to us.
Yes, I'm very, very lucky to have a studio space with a delightful couch.
Yeah. I do want to read a couple questions from the audience. And actually this first one is from Mad Moore, one of the artists in the show who's visiting us from Michigan.
Hi.
He says, "Hi Rex, thank you so much for your performance. I was really interested in some of your choreography, and the phrase fragility of a hinge come to mind, both for books and for joints of the body. Does this resonate with you at all? I was thinking of one of your movements where you were on your toes, and then even as you place a cinder block at the very end of your performance."
That's such a wonderful combination of words and a great question. Yeah, I think a lot about the bend. I think a lot about the bend in sculpture and in performance. I did an entire series of just me bending in the same way in different places. So I love that that came through. It was definitely a current, and where I kind of started with a lot of the movements that I put together for the show. The fragility of that bend or that hinge, I think translates really well to the words I was working with and like the ideas that I was trying to embody. I guess some insight into where the gestures came from. Some of the sounds that you were hearing were from an archive of oral histories that I've been engaging with for the past year. And so the text that I generate, like the bodily, like the choreography, for lack of a better word, that I generated for this performance came from specific language from that archive, as well as language that I was reading online within the books in the show, and my interpretations. I did like a lot of writing to prepare the choreography. That's usually how I work, which is another wonderful connection between the book and performance, I think, for me personally, because all of my performance comes from writing at one point. So I definitely relate to the language of the hinge. The specific moment where I'm on my toes and its relationship to the cinder blocks is a continued attempt within the piece and within making pieces like that for me, where I'm trying to like create a sentence. So the gestures that I began with were all kind of establishing a language for me at the beginning. Like, we're entering this moment, this book, this like gap of time between these two things. These are the words I'm going to be using. They might just not make sense by the end, and then they get jumbled. And to kind of connect the body to the objects that we started with, that's where that like sentence, period, comma, punctuation of some kind of comes to play for me, if that sheds light.
Yeah, that's great. And I feel like that's actually a really good segue to this next question from Stephanie Grimm. She says, thank you for sharing in this performance. In choreographing this, were you thinking of the visual form of language as well? Your repeated movements made me think of letter forms, accumulating through the piece in variation/recombination at the culmination.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying, like a lot of the choreography that I generate comes from text, and a practice that I'm actually in the process of developing in another project as well, simultaneous to this one, is what does translating or transcribing mean when moving from written language to physical language. So for me, the gestures of choreography that I assembled, those do directly relate in a very visual way to language. There were two languages at work actually in the audio. There was Farsi and there was English. My family's from Iran. The archive that I'm working with is a combination of English speaking and Iranian and Farsi speaking individuals recounting moments in a very particular moment in Iranian history. So the archive has both a oral archive, but also a written. And so sometimes when I'm generating the choreography, I'll refer to the written Farsi, which is very specific. It's very similar to Arabic for people who haven't seen it written down. And the gesture of that script from right to left, and it's a script language, therefore like they're connected, I find directly correlates to dance and movement. So while not all of them were from a visual form of text, some of them are definitely. And the bend actually is a very big part of that. Thanks.
Great, thanks. We have another question from Robert Goody. And he says, the narrative/story seemed very important to the performance. And there seemed strong intentionality in terminating that audio when you did. He also says, I confess to not being sure of the intention in terminating at that moment in the story. Would you comment on that?
Yeah. I love that there was I think that this platform is really interesting for the use of audio that is spoken, the spoken word, because I was curious as to see like where the attention would go when you're, engaging with a flat performance experience. So I'm glad that it triggered something and that you were listening to the audio and hopefully maybe in catching some of the English speaking story. Terminating it for me in performance and in movement in particular, it's really important and I don't know if I can tell you exactly why, but it's really important to have a moment of silence where it's just movement distilled. Again, I think I battle a little bit the digital translation of that moment, but I think that to be able to just experience some, like you looking at a body moving and like the sounds that happen in a space when my body was moving, that was my hope to terminate the sound at that moment, was to draw a little bit more attention to this kind of culmination that was about to happen and mark time a little bit differently.
It's also just a really interesting way to think about startings and endings. So sawing the block of wood in half in order to open up that space and to create room for the performance to happen, and then creating this kind of architectural silence or natural sound for you to be wrapping up the performance in, is two really different and interesting, like, opening and closing gestures. This is a question for both of us, and it's from Erica. Can you talk about the role labor plays in your craft?
Shall I start?
Yeah, go for it, and then I'll jump in at the end.
Okay. Yeah, labor, I think there's, I guess I have a handful of answers to this question based on like what aspect of my practice we would be talking about specifically. But in this moment for this performance and in my live work, I guess I think in my sculptural work as well, labor is really a communication of effort. Like, I think there's something interesting in taking apart what labor means, and that often has to do with what it's in relationship to. So to me, I mentioned earlier that failure plays a huge role in my sculptural work and in my performative and dance work. So for me, failure and labor/effort, I like to engage them with each other. I think that effort for effort's sake makes it into my work a lot, and labor for labor's sake also makes it into my work. And as to Christopher's earlier comment about history, I think that the labor of history and the labor of communicating that history is a relevant idea in a lot of my approaches to my practice.
Yeah, I think that just the term labor is so much to also unpack and see how that functions within a practice. And as like a quick answer for myself, I feel that labor, in terms of my physical labor, my physical work, is also really tied to craft and a relationship, a very close relationship with materials and process, and how the work can progress by literal laying on of hands and producing the work itself. And that can begin to start to ask questions as well. And because of like my practice is not just myself making books, it's also producing community-oriented and community-produced publications. And in that sense, it is the labor of other people participating in this thing and trying to value and honor that as much as possible. But I'm going to put a pin in that and just move on to the next question, because we have another question from Mad Moore. And she says, this was just an observation, but I found it incredibly interesting that when we were listening to the language over Zoom, it was somewhat garbled and scrambled. This could just be my internet, in parentheses. And wondered if this was an intentional scrambling as it relates to Iranian history, and a kind of relocating to form an Iranian American community. Also, as a parenthetical, her cousins are also Iranian American. And she says, sorry for such a long question, although it's not that long.
Not long at all. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. The sound, I was playing 3 different things at once. So while it may have been a little bit of internet, I think it was also, it is intentional, the obscuring of the audio and of the narrative. because the narrative of one recording is important, but not for me in this way of working with the archive as important as a larger narrative. And so my attempt of like blending like class, like some of the most, I mean, the song that was playing is like by one of the most famous Iranian pop stars ever. Her name is Gugush. Highly recommend. She's delightful. But she, like, to have that music, like old country music playing, and the Iranian speaking in Farsi and Iranian speaking in English, for me illustrates the hyphenation that I'm trying to get at, like the scrambling, like you were saying, of the history of Iran, and like in particular my angle into this history is like very the contemporary history of the past like 30, 40 years, and what's happened and how much sense that it doesn't make and does make, and how complicated it's, like just so complicated. And I think language is a great tool to make things more complicated. So yeah, garbled intentionally. That was a long-winded answer to your observation.
And we have another question from Lenore. It says, the performance for me resonated as a multiple translation of a book or message spoken in several languages. The conflict and or balance of both realities / languages / cultures provoked emotions that were translated by your body movements. A language is not a group of words, but also reflect different cultures. These two cultures can be harmonic or conflicting. What would you like to comment on that?
Well, thank you for your observations, because that's definitely where what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to create a language. You know, every piece is another step in the building of a language for me in performance and dance right now, and not just right now, for quite a few years now. Commenting on I like your use of harmonic. I would definitely say there's like some harmony and also some dissonance, to keep with the musical reference, musical language. In being Iranian American, being very American, and also happening to be Iranian, I'm, learning the language of my family. I have been studying the language in the past 2 years. The failure embedded in connecting to something that is both yours and not yours. A history, for instance, in this archive that is not my history, but also a little bit my history, and feeling a familiarity when there really shouldn't be one. Some voices resonate more than others. Some Farsi I can understand when some speak it versus on others. So I think that dance and performance are really interesting and helpful tools for me to embody the harmony and the dissonance, and like the tension, in the most simplest form. Like, bodies are so complicated too, but can also be so legible in a movement. Like, it's just so exciting that people can like watch this and get these questions from it. I think that excites me, and I think it's I guess that's my comment about it without going on and on. Yeah.
Thanks. I also wanted to just hear your thoughts a little bit more around the ideas of translation, which itself is so complicated to translate from one language to another verbally or within text, let alone doing so in a bodily manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, It's hard and weird. It's been really a fun and fascinating research direction that has completely taken over my whole practice. And I want to like just throw an anecdote in there. I was talking to a friend of mine, a new friend who is a American Sign Language translator in DC. And I was describing how obsessed I am with translation and how I have all these projects and I feel like I'm building up all these languages. It's getting tangled and messy. And he's like, well, are you translating or are you transcribing? Like, what's the like, and then he like was really, he was very intentional about the difference between those two words. And I think that's a great example of like how in the weeds, my relationship to translation has become as someone who is trying to, who identifies a gap. For instance, like I don't speak Farsi, I get some words out of it, I'm practicing it. In the meantime, what are the languages available to me? Okay, I trained in dance for, 13 years. Okay, I can dance. I know the language of ballet and contemporary dance. How can I use those things to embody what I'm missing, and from there it just gets more and more layered and weird. Like I was saying earlier, a lot of the initial translation happens in a written form, and there's a long history of score building and dance choreography annotation that I am not engaged in literally. I haven't like learned those languages because I have enough languages on my plate. But writing, my relationship to translation really is just like how many stages can I work through to get to like a really earnest interpretation of what I'm receiving. And then by translating it, getting to like another place. I think the difference in, translating or transcribing one language to another for me is that it's not just an interpretation for communicating, but an interpretation to like reach something higher that I think dance and sculpture and performance can do. Because again, those are the languages and the tools that I have at my disposal. And I think that's what's exciting to me is that it's generative, right? So like the more Farsi I understand, the more the practice changes and the more the movements alter. For me too, building performances like that, it's important to create restrictions as part of the translating into something live, so that all these things can get across. So, for this piece, I created 12 movements that I repeated 12 times. I think I lost track a couple of times. But the fact, like limitations in relationship to language are really helpful in translating for me and in generating text.
Great. Thank you. That's like just a really wonderful discussion. And we had a lot of really good questions from the audience. It was great to be able to read some of these out to you. But that's all the questions that I have. And I think that we are getting close to time. But before I turn this over to Grace to wrap everything up, I just really want to say thank you again for being part of this and being part of the show, and for your really wonderful performance tonight, and for being so generous with your time, talking with everyone here afterwards. Yeah. And thanks to everyone for joining us. There's been 30 plus participants all evening, which is really wonderful. And I also want to thank Janelle and Erica and Sophia and Sarah for making all this happen online, and for allowing the show to continue. Like, there's even more educational opportunities on the website that you can be exploring. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Rex. Again, I certainly echo everything that Christopher said. I mentioned earlier that this is such a special way to end our virtual programs for this exhibition. You truly activated, these small works and these big ideas and brought another version of life. I think you even referenced the performance during our rehearsal as a living book. So, so many takeaways from referencing the craft of the artist's book creation, that fragile hinge, the bend, the language, the movement of the text and the letter, taking a moment to pause and be in silence, which books organically and thankfully provide and deliver to us anyway, and then commenting on roots and heritage, which in the most recent category that was released by the Velocity of a Page exhibition, publishing as a practice, I perceive that many artists were very passionate and express a lot of ideas with their cultural heritage. So again, thank you for letting us in and allowing us to be a part of something so personal and special to you. A few quick notes before we head out, some news from Grace. Today we released our second Explore More Home edition. So Explore More typically takes place in our gallery and provides self-guided exploration activities for both kids and families. And the content is inspired by our exhibition programs. So this week's program, or this week's edition of Explore More Online, is from the Velocity of a Page. So we're really happy to be able to continue to allow the community to engage with the work of this exhibition past this week. So please keep an eye out and check our website for that. Also, we are super excited to announce the extension of the More Dryer Yours for the Asking exhibition, which is currently on view in our main gallery. The exhibit will be available now to experience until November 2020 of this year. So for those who don't know, this exhibition was really special and personal to former executive director and curator Lily Siegel, who's here with us tonight. The exhibition was coincidingly curated alongside a partner exhibition at the Phillips Collection called Moyer Dryer Back to Business, also curated by Lily. So this partnership is a first of its kind for Greater Reston Arts Center, being able to exhibit alongside such a prestigious institution. So we're really proud and happy and thankful to Lily for making that happen. Please keep an eye out for a new online viewing room for Moyer Dryer for the Grace exhibit, and save the date for our upcoming virtual programs. More information about those programs can be found on our website at restonarts.org, and you can also follow us on social media at Reston Arts to stay updated on all things. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in a few weeks in our upcoming virtual programs. Have a great evening.